right. So, getting back to Bush's little story right there, talking about their experience recently. Last week we talked about Daniel chapter 10, where Daniel encountered who we believe to be the angel Gabriel, and Gabriel was delivering a message. And really, in essence, what chapter 10 ended up being was a setup, a prologue for tonight's chapter, chapter 11 in the book of Daniel. So, but as I think about what you guys were sharing, I think about how you guys were impacted, understanding that something significant was there. Can you imagine now, with having had that experience now, put yourself in Daniel's shoes for a moment and then consider what Daniel's experiencing in this event. So when we finished chapter 10 last week, we didn't, the Bible sometimes doesn't do, or the developers of the Bible sometimes don't do a great job in the division of the chapters, because really this is a seamless event from chapter 10 into chapter 11 as we pick up. Last week Daniel had this vision of an angel. He was struggling physically with receiving this. He was getting history in advance. And we know that's how God validates His Word, is because that's what we call prophecy. God tells us history in advance, and then when it comes to pass, we said, oh God, you know what you're talking about. You must be God. Nobody else can do that. So it validates and verifies Scripture as the truth. It validates itself, so to speak. So we're going to dig in tonight, and I don't want to discourage us, but tonight, in one sense, could be considered to be just a tad bit dry, in the sense that it is historical. It's ancient history. So what I'm going to do, rather than go just necessarily detail by detail, what I'm going to try to do is do a flyover of the history and try to get us to verse 36, and then we'll slow down for a moment when we hit verse 36 of chapter 11. So, if you'll put up that first slide, Stoney, and then we'll just hang there for a second. Let me ask you this question. How many of your Bibles, if you flip between the Old Testament and the New Testament, it says 400 silent years? I had a Thompson Chain Reference Bible, and in between that it said the 400 silent years. And really what this does, although as Daniel sees it, this chapter 11 is actually going to cover the so-called 400 silent years. We closed out the Old Testament with the book of Malachi, and then we pick up essentially what is the closing of the Old Testament with the prophet John the Baptist coming on the scene, the last prophet, if you will. But this 400 silent years is what we're going to begin to dig into and kind of uncover a little bit. Now, when we talked in chapter 8, there was all kinds of stuff. There was a ram and there was a he-goat with one horn, and then one horn broke off and 4 horns sprang up, and we were all like, what? If I rewound us all the way back to chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar had an image. Daniel prayed, identify that image as some kingdoms. In Daniel, later on, Daniel had a vision in chapter 7, and identified some kingdoms again in a much different way. So we've talked about Babylon, we've talked about Medo-Persia, we've talked about Greece, and we've talked about Rome. Those are the 4 kingdoms, and as it relates to the Nebuchadnezzar's image, we had the head of gold, the chest and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, and then the legs of iron, and then the feet mixed with iron mixed with clay. So we're going to pick up tonight with the tail end in chapter 11, the tail end of the Medo-Persian Empire. So when we look at chapter 11, verse 1. All right, so chapter 11 contains one of the most specifically fulfilled prophecies of the Bible. It actually predicts 375 years with amazing accuracy. To the point that when you study Daniel chapter 11, some say that Daniel was not a prophet, he was a historian. There's no way that he could have gotten what he got accurately without looking back on it and recording it as history. We know differently, don't we? Because that's how God validates His Word. He gives it to us. He gives us history in advance, and that's what He has done with Daniel. So, Let's pick up here in verse 1. So also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and strengthen him. Now this I there is we're still talking about Gabriel, because Gabriel's given this message to Daniel. And verse 2 says, "And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than them all by his strength through his riches, and he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece." So we're about to see the transition from the Medo-Persian Empire into the Grecian Empire historically. Now God's telling this prophetically. Does that make sense? It hadn't happened yet in the eyes of Daniel. In our eyes it has happened. So we're kind of blending those two. So the angel Gabriel's telling Daniel this. So 3 more kings will arise in Persia. There's going to be 3 more kings, and the fourth arose. When the fourth king comes on and begins to oppose the realm of Greece, then that'll be the last one of the Medo-Persians. The fourth shall be far richer. It ends up that Daniel was speaking about, the book of Daniel here is talking about King Xerxes. If you remember the book of Esther, he was who was in power. Remember Haman, wicked Haman was trying to, that was the king that was in place when that was all going down. So at this point, chronologically, it can get a little confusing, because you got to flip backwards in your Bible to get to Esther. But what Daniel's predicting, was before the story of Esther had actually taken place with regard to Xerxes and the Medo-Persian Empire. So anyway, these visions and insights that they have regarding the future of the Persian and Greek empires, it's important that this focus is here, because both the Persian Empire and the Greek Empire tried to wipe out God's chosen people. Now, they're not the only ones down through the annals of time, but here, for the sake of tonight, the Persian and the Greek empires are relevant to our story here, because each empire attempted to wipe out the Jews. The Persian Empire tried to wipe out the Jewish people during the reign of Xerxes, when through the wicked plot of Haman. We know the story of Esther there. And then the Greek Empire tried to wipe out the Jewish people during the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus IV. And I've got, in a minute, I'll bring up another slide there. I've got to explain what I've got here first, though. So anyway, you've got this Greek Empire coming on the scene. And we studied that a little bit in chapter 8. Remember, we talked about Antiochus Epiphanes going into the temple and slaying a pig, and then setting up an image inside the temple, and how he was a picture of the Antichrist in the last days. He was kind of a forerunner, if you will. So we talked about that in chapter 8, and I believe it's long about 10, verses 10, 12, right around in there. But anyway, let's pick up verse 3 now. "Then a mighty king shall rise, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided towards the 4 winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion to which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for the others besides these." So this mighty king shall arise. Now, we learned about this again in chapter 8. He's going to have great dominion, but his kingdom would not endure. So we're talking about Alexander the Great here. Alexander was that little horn in chapter 8. But here, Gabriel's reiterating to Daniel that this Grecian king is going to come on the scene with great power. So you got the 4th Persian king. He's going to be the last one to reign. You can put 2 and 2 together. That's all he's told. But he understands, because he's the last one to reign, then another king comes on the scene. Ends up being Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great died at 32 years old. They said he wept and at one point, because he had no more lands to conquer. He was such a devouring, conquering, empire or fighter. Chapter 8, I believe it's chapter 8, says that when the goat came across, his feet didn't even touch the ground. He moved like he was represented as a leopard in Daniel's vision in chapter 7. So Greece was represented by a leopard with the speed with which it moves. So here we've got Alexander the Great, again depicted here by Daniel as being this powerful force. But what's going to happen to him is his kingdom's going to be broken up, and divided to the four winds of heaven, but not among his posterity. He didn't have anybody of his own line that could take the reins. So what happens there is none of his descendants succeeded. One of his sons, a brother named Philip, was mentally deficient. And then he had an illegitimate son named Hercules, and then a half-brother. So none of them could take the reins. What ended up happening, though, is on his deathbed, let's see, where have I got that written? He died at a drunken party in Babylon, so the commentators say. But on his deathbed, he laid there and they said, "What do you want to do with your kingdom?" It's rumored that he said this. He said, "What do you want to do with the kingdom?" He said, "Give it to the strong." Well, so what do you think that did? That promoted and provoked a bunch of infighting amongst that empire. Well, what ended up happening was his empire was divided, just like the word said. Now, remember, we're reading prophecy when we read Daniel as far in relation to him. So with great accuracy it says, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided to the four winds of heaven. Well, his kingdom was historically divided up, and it was broken up into four regions. If you'll look there, four of his generals took over: Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and then Ptolemy. If you can see, Seleucus and Ptolemy really are going to be the ones that we end up talking about, because if you'll look in between Egypt and then Syria and Babylon and that area, what's in between that? The Promised Land, isn't it? So it ends up essentially being a battleground for these two kingdoms that end up warring against each other for about 150 years. So as we look at that, the main reason that these are focused on these two inheritors of Alexander's realm is because they're constantly fighting over the Promised Land. Because it essentially sits between these centers of power. It's interesting that today they're still fighting over the Promised Land, at least up until May 14th, 1948. Now that Israel's a nation, they're still fighting over there. But it just goes to show how important Israel is to that region over there. All right, so now let's dig into verse 5, and it's going to get a little, so just keep this map, if you will, just kind of keep this map in the back of your mind. Cassander and Lysimachus, you don't have to pay too much attention to them, but just remember Seleucus ends up being referred to as the kings of the north. All those from his line, kings of the north. Ptolemy, Egypt, that region down there, kings of the south. Yeah, so if you'll look where Ptolemy is, you're looking there at Egypt, Ethiopia, right at the northern part of Africa there. If you look at Seleucus's empire, you're looking at Iran, you're looking at Iraq, you're looking at Syria, you're looking at Lebanon, you're looking at Turkey. Lysimachus is more in Turkey there, but you're in Syria is what Seleucus is in there, modern day. There where Lysimachus is Turkey. So when we read the 7 letters or 7 churches in Revelation in Asia Minor, that was where the 7 churches in Asia were located in the New Testament period. And then Cassander's back over there in the homeland pretty much. All right, so as we zero in on the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, so kings of the north and the kings of the south. So let's look at verse 5 for a minute. So also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. The king of the south shall be strong. So one of the 4 inheritors of the empire of the mighty king would be stronger and greater than the others, and that ended up being Ptolemy. This was fulfilled with Ptolemy I. So if you want to put that other slide up for me. All right, so what this is divided there, if you'll just look, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, the kings of the south are the Ptolemies. The kings of the north, as referred to in Scripture, are the Seleucids, following after those generals, if you will. You can look down through there and see that there were 6 Ptolemies, and then when you look at the Seleucids there, are 6 Ptolemy leaders, and then you look to the right-hand column there and you see the Seleucid leaders listed out there. Antiochus IV Epiphanes being the last one, and he's kind of who we'll sum up with tonight. So And if you guys want to, I can make you a copy of that, or we can do something. I can get you that just for your study. It helps. It helped me to see it like this, and that way you can just reference it out like that. So he shall gain power over him and have dominions. This king of the south became strong. So this was Ptolemy. Now Ptolemy had a prince named Seleucus, who ended up rising to power, and he took dominion over the region of Syria. So you've got Seleucus I Nicator, or Nicator, however you want to pronounce that. I'm from Western North Carolina, so it's Nicator. Potator, tomater, Nicator. All right. So Seleucus I Nicator. So Ptolemy sends Seleucus up to the north and says, hey, I want you to look out after that territory for me. All right. So, and then what ends up happening, as we saw by that map earlier, he ends up gaining and more territory and power than his Egyptian, than Ptolemy does, which ends up causing them to end up, this is the beginning of the infighting now for, I said 150 years, it's actually 130 years that these two had continued to fight down through the annals of time. And if you remember that map there, Israel was right in the middle of their fight. So one would march across and they'd fight a little bit and get whipped, and they'd go back. The other would come up and they'd get whipped and they'd go back. And in the meantime, whoever won the fight, that's whoever got to keep the glorious land, as it's referred to here in Scripture. So let's look on now to verse 6. At the end of some of the years, they shall join forces. So this marriage happens. And there's a lot of political marriages that go down. So this marriage happens. For the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of her authority. Neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. So joined by a marriage, the kings in the north and the south would end up being allies for a while. This arrangement doesn't end up lasting. What happens is the daughter, there in the scripture where it says the daughter of the king of the south goes to the king of the north to make this agreement. This was fulfilled in the marriage. Historically, this was fulfilled in the marriage between Antiochus II of the Seleucids, which was the third in the line of the northern kings, married Berenice, the daughter of Ptolemy II. There was peace for a time because of this marriage, but it ended up, these were political arrangements. So when Ptolemy II died, this arrangement, this marital peace arrangement, died with it. So what ended up happening is Antiochus II put away Bernice, this political wife, if you will, and then his real wife ends up poisoning him, Bernice, and then their offspring. So you've got a real Game of Thrones thing kind of going on right there with regard to history, what's happening here. She didn't trust her husband, so she had him poisoned. And then there in the verse finishing up says, shall be given up with those who brought her. After this murder, Laodice was her name, set her son Seleucus II on the throne, which ended up being the third ruler in the northern kingdom. Now, really, as far as all this goes, what we're trying to get here, we're not trying to take a history class that's a semester long tonight. We're just trying to get the gist of what was going on as far as the Grecian Empire. So we've watched the Persian Empire go away. I just want to make sure we understand that. A couple of weeks ago, we watched the Babylonian Empire go away. Now tonight, we've watched the Persian Empire go away. By the end of tonight, we'll watch the Grecian Empire go away. So that's kind of what I'm doing. That's what we're doing here. I'm covering a lot of these names and stuff. Let's look at verses 7 through 9. So this southern army is going to come in and defeat the northern army. But from a branch of her roots one shall arise in his place, who shall come with an army and enter the fortress of the king of the north. Now that branch of her roots, we're talking about Berenice's brother, ends up being her brother. But anyway, let me move on. He enters the forces of the kings of the north and deals with them and prevails. And so he shall carry their gods captive to Egypt. With their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold he shall continue more years than the king of the north. And also the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but he shall return to his own land. So The angel was telling the branch, her roots, is going to come from the south and end up prevailing. So here we see that now the south's on attack. They're coming up, and they're going to. So Ptolemy the third. Now we're down to Ptolemy number 3, the third in the succession of these Ptolemies, was the brother of Berenice. Berenice, remember, she got killed by the jealous wife. All right, so this avenging brother, he's coming along, going to avenge the murder of his sister, and here we go. And he invaded Syria, and he humbled Seleucus too. Now Seleucus too, you see, he was the fourth leader out of the Seleucids there. So we're making our way just fine through time. Okay, just understand the 400 silent years. Because when you think about it, you're looking right there. You're looking really at the closeout of the Medo-Persia Empire. You know, the whole story of Esther to, after King Xerxes, and that kind of comes to an end. You're really looking at about 400 BC all the way up through the New Testament, really, until Rome comes into power. So Daniel's given us an entire picture from Nebuchadnezzar's image, foreseeing world empires. Then we've seen world empires prophesied, and from his perspective, again, all this is yet future. We've got the luxury of nodding our head and saying, well, yeah, historically that proved out to be fact. It's really easy for us to take that at face value, especially when many have done the work for us. But anyway, let me get going on here. So verse 10, let's look at verse 10. However, his son shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. So that pass through here, the sons of the kings of the north continue to battle, and one of the sons conquer the Holy Land. He passes through there. He overwhelms it and passes through. Essentially what the Holy Land did was stood as a buffer. It's kind of a no-go zone, essentially, is what it stood for so long. So if you could control more of that, then essentially you had the military advantage. So he passed through and takes over the Holy Land, and he stirs up strife, the word says, and he assembles a multitude of great forces. So this was fulfilled with Seleucus III and Antiochus III. So we look there, which were the sons of Seleucus II. So Seleucus III and Antiochus III, the great, were sons, and they were brothers. Sons of Seleucus II, but brothers to each other. Seleucus III only ended up ruling a short time before he was succeeded by his brother. And then, so let's move on to verses 11 and 12. And the king of the south shall be moved with rage, and he will go out and fight with him, with the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude. But the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. And when he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. So the king of south ended up being moved with rage, and he doesn't end up prevailing. So we see where Antiochus was defeated in history. Antiochus III was defeated in the Battle of Raphia. Because of that loss, he was forced to give back the dominion where they had passed through and conquered the Holy Land, had to give that back to Ptolemy IV. Now Ptolemy IV is on the scene at this point. And again, it took me a while. It can get a little bit confusing, because what you're looking at is we have the luxury of opening up the history books, getting to the internet, and we can find this history out. But to the point that I want to stop and make here is the fact, the degree of accuracy that Gabriel gave Daniel. Daniel's just writing what he's being told down, and so when we're talking about the prophetic in that sense, what kind of caliber of prophetic are we talking about here? We're not talking about something that can be pretended, something that can be faked. This is something that has to come, from God Himself. And again, I love to quote Chuck Missler. He says, this is an integrated message system. It's 66 books penned by over 40 authors. This is God's communique to people of earth. This is His communique to us. So it stands to reason that He's going to communicate this with great accuracy. So when we sit in a book like Daniel and we study ancient history and we say, I'm a Christian, I go to church and I sing songs on Sunday and I pray for people I work with, what's this got anything to do with me? It just, as it pertains to us, what's our takeaway? That's what I'm asking tonight. What do I take away from this? If I'm sitting in your shoes, you're asking, what's the takeaway from this? What is it? How does this mean? What's this pertain to? We have to understand the big picture. And the big picture here is that God is dealing from Genesis 3:15 to Revelation chapter 22, even so come quickly, Lord Jesus. God has got a plan in place. And every bit of this is working to accomplish that specific plan. All these, if you want to think about it like a spider web, at the center, you may be at the center of that particular one. But all these spectrums and things and rounding, they all matter. There's all important facts that matter in the grand plan of God. And for people that just think Christianity is attending church on Sunday and wearing nice clothes, you're doing yourself a disservice, because there's so much more about life, about death, about living, about dying, about worshiping, about loving, about it's so much more. And you say, well, here we are, we're talking about this. The thing about it is that the Bible covers from A to Z every single thing that we need to know, from the fact that I am saved, to the fact, where did we come from? How did sin start? How does sin finish? Where am I going? The Bible answers all those questions. And we're looking at one chapter out of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of chapters that really zeroes in on one of the details that should encourage us. And the encouragement and the takeaway that I'm trying to use tonight is the fact that God, His Word can be trusted. And the reason His Word can be trusted is because, what I've said already 3 times tonight, He recorded history in advance. So we're all the way down now in history as we look back on it to Ptolemy number 4. Daniel 13 verses, let's read 13 through 16 now. For the king of the north will return and muster a multitude greater than the former. So he got whipped, and he's going to go back and he's going to drum up some more armies, historically. And he shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. Now in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and build a siege mount and take the fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. So the king of the north is going to come down, and this victory would give this king of the north dominion over the glorious land. Now, again, when we say glorious land, we all understand what we're talking about there. And it's one of the commentators that I read. He's quoted as saying this. He said, "The glorious land, the land of ornaments, that is Judea, which lying betwixt these 2 potent princes was perpetually afflicted, as corn is ground asunder, lying betwixt 2 heavy millstones." So they were the benefactors of all of this conflict and war because of their location. Just sometimes just where you're at, you ended up, kind of end up being in the crossfire, so to speak. And that's where they were during this span of time. No one shall stand against him. This was fulfilled when Antiochus III invaded Egypt again, gaining final control over Ptolemy the fifth Ptolemy or 5, over the Holy Land. That portion there, it says, many shall rise up against the king of the south. At this point, the Jews living in the Holy Land helped Antiochus III defeat the king of the south, because the Jewish people resented the rule of the Egyptian Ptolemies, which it doesn't end up lasting long. But anyway, they decided that they wanted to help the king of the north, Antiochus III there. So looking at verse 17. He shall also set his face to enter with strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do. He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him or be for him. So he shall set his face The king of the north, who ends up ruling over the Holy Land here, also attempts to dominate and destroy the king of the south. This plot, he says the daughter of women to destroy, he's going to send her there. It doesn't succeed because she doesn't stand with him. So Antiochus III gave his daughter, who was named Cleopatra. Now, this is not the Cleopatra of world fame here, but his daughter was named Cleopatra. He sends her down as a peace offering or whatever, basically as a spy, if you will, to Ptolemy V of Egypt. And he did this hoping to gain some kind of permanent influence or some kind of control, basically let her infiltrate this their inner workings there. It didn't succeed because Cleopatra ended up liking the Egyptians better than she did her own family. So it kind of backfired on Antiochus III. So anyway, backfired on him. Shame on you. So let's look at verses 18 and 19. After this he shall turn his face to the coastlands, and he shall take the many. But a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end, and with the reproach removed, he shall turn back on him, and then he shall turn his face towards the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. So he turns his back on them. He loses his daughter. He turns his back on them. They're behind him now. He's heading home, back towards the coastlands, back towards his fortress. But he ends up stumbling. The word says he shall stumble and fall. What happened to him there is he turned his attention towards Asia Minor and Greece, and he ended up being helped by Hannibal there historically. We watch some of these movies, and it's amazing at how some of these movies that you watch that Hollywood's put out, if you kind of know where to put them in relation to the word, it's like, oh, okay, cool. That was in Daniel chapter 11, or that happened. It would really be cool if we could always put them in context. But anyway, he gets defeated there. Antiochus III gets defeated on his way back. He's looking for somebody easy to beat up on, and he just can't win for losing. He loses out himself. He goes back to Babylon and tries to pillage the temples there, and gets killed by the citizenry there that's defending their temples. So that's the end of Antiochus III. So now, Daniel chapter 11, verse 20. Then shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom. So now you've got somebody coming in taxing the glorious kingdom. But within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. And then there shall arise in his place. All right, so this one that's the brother that didn't last long, Seleucus III, he was the one that didn't last a long time. So we followed Antiochus III's story. Remember, they were brothers, and I told you Seleucus III didn't stay in power long. We're just going to cover him right quick, and that's him here. He tries to tax the glorious land. It doesn't bode well for him, and he ended up being assassinated by his brother Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, Antiochus number 4, Epiphanes. Now, for those of you that are following along, you see now I'm at the bottom of the list. You're like, hey, good, he's at the bottom of the list. He can't be talking about much else in this. Okay, I'm at the bottom of the list, but we're going to zero in on Antiochus 4, Epiphanes. All right, so the word calls him a vile person. So 11 verse 21, this vile person ends up coming to power. So, and in his place shall arise a vile person, to whom they will not give the honor of royalty. But now I want you to follow this, guys. But he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. Now, who does that sound like? Who does that sound like? We know that the Antichrist from Daniel 9:27 is going to confirm a covenant, but he's going to be, he's going to be suave and smooth and able to communicate with a lot of people. So Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, ends up being a type or a shadow of Antichrist. Here we see the word even labels him as coming in peaceably and seizing the kingdom by intrigue. Amplified. Flatteries, intrigue, cunning, and hypocritical conduct. That's how he came into power. And boy, that sounds like politics of modern day, doesn't it? I won't get us banned off YouTube though. Don't worry about it. I'll just keep it. I'll keep it G-rated right there for as far as the political comments go. But in his place shall arise this vile person. So the angel is telling Daniel that after this brief reign of this former king of the north, this next one coming into power is going to be a vile person who gains his power peaceably and seizes the kingdom by intrigue, cunning, and all that. He'll be recognized as royalty, but he takes power by intrigue. So he shall come peaceably. Apart from the murder of his older brother, Antiochus IV, coming into power here, he didn't use terror to gain power. He used flattery and smooth promises. Okay, so he took the name or the title there, Epiphanes, which actually means illustrious, when that translates out to illustrious. But others called him Epimanes, which actually meant madman. So that's probably a more realistic description of who and what he was. So and we know this historically as well. So let's look at verses 22, and I want to read through 27. With the force of a flood they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. And after a league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. He shall enter peaceably, and even to the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. Yes, those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. But these kings' hearts shall not be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will be still at an appointed time, or still be at the appointed time. That's another one of those things I would underline there. For the end will still be at the appointed time. See, there's an appointed time in the eyes of God for certain things to happen. Whether we're talking about Donald Trump being 70 years old, 7 months and 7 days old when he took office, and things like that, appointed times, right? Or when God says, that's it, go get my church, that's an appointed time. God knows that appointed time. You know, there was an appointed time to send his son into the earth. That was an appointed time. There's an appointed time when he's coming back with his church. That's also an appointed time. So as we look at this, just tell yourself, there is an appointed time. Now, if we was in one of them churches, I'd say, everybody say appointed time. But I ain't going to do that. But if I was, that's where I'd have done it at right there. All right. But there is. There's an appointed time. And God's good because he's always, we talked about this in Genesis, he's always on time. He's always on time. So let's get back on task here. This vile person, he's going to act deceitfully. The angel tells Daniel that this new king of the north, Antiochus IV, he's going to attempt a deceitful covenant with the king of the south. This ends up failing, and it brings about a great battle. Now we know the Antichrist is actually going to confirm a covenant, and he's going to be deceitful because he's going to break that covenant halfway through. We learn that in both in Daniel and in the book of Revelation. We see where that happens. It marks the midpoint of the tribulation, a transition into what's called the Great Tribulation. But again, Antiochus Epiphanes, a type or a shadow of Antichrist. So he shall stir up his power. And he carries on these feuds between these dynasties and faking a friendship, but his army ends up being swept away. So this defeat of Antiochus Epiphanes at his second campaign, and this is important here because we're fixing to see yet another transition. Remember, we're at the bottom of the list of the Grecian Seleucid kings here. So he gets defeated at his second campaign against Egypt. because Egypt beat him with the help of Rome. Ah, so now we see Rome somewhere behind the scenes becoming a power historically at this point as it relates here. We knew it happened, right? But here's where it happened at. At the conclusion, when Antiochus IV gets beat, here comes Rome into power. All right. New Testament, we know Rome's in power when we open up the New Testament, don't we? We just realize that. So if you've ever wondered these transitions of world empires, here we are. And it's bringing us almost up to, I would say, modern ancient history. Is that a thing? Okay. All right. So anyway, he gets beat. And it says, those who eat the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. So all the people that he confided in, all the people that he sat down and ate dinner with, those were the ones that betrayed him. And because of that, he leaves there. He leaves Egypt, he goes back, and on his way back through, he's going to pick on the little guy. It's kind of like somebody kicking a cat when you're mad. That's what he's going to do. So he goes back to Jerusalem, or he goes back to the Holy Land now, and he takes this out on the holy people. On God's people, on the glorious lands, what I'm trying to get said there. In chapter 8, we talked about this. We talked about him going in. We talked about the Maccabean revolt when Judas Maccabeus. Remember we talked about that? Judas Maccabeus leading that revolt. We got the celebration. The Jews got the celebration of Hanukkah, or the Festival of Lights, or dedication. As a result of that, they celebrate Hanukkah when they took the temple back over. It was Antiochus Epiphanes on his way back from this battle when he goes into Rome or goes back into the Holy Land, and then he begins to defile the temple. If you'll look right there, he lived in 175 to 163 BC. So the Maccabean revolt occurred in 164 BC, and so in 164 BC there you have the Judas Maccabeus leading that revolt, taking the temple back over, purifying the temple, dedicating the temple again, and we've already hit that, but I just wanted to go back and remind us that that's how this all plays out in relation to the other. Okay, so let's move on. Daniel 28 through 35, and then we'll get in. We're doing good. So while returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant. So he shall do damage and return to his own land. At the appointed time he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him, therefore shall he be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. And then forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary forces, and then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. So we read in Revelation that that's going to occur when the Antichrist goes into the temple in the future, and he's going to set himself up as God to be worshipped as God, not a God. He's going to go into the temple and defile the temple. And you say, what temple? Well, the temple that they're going to build. That's why that's such big news when they get to talking about it in the news this day and time. That's why people are like, oh my gosh, have you heard the conversation about the third temple being built? Man, it's going to happen. But there's got to be a third temple, right, for this guy to go into to defile. As a type or a shadow, Antiochus Epiphanes did exactly that, like I mentioned just a few minutes earlier. He goes in and he commits the abomination of desolation. That's where he actually slaughters and pours pig's blood on the altar there, and then sets up a statue, not to himself, but to Zeus. He sets up this an image of Zeus at the temple altar and demanded that they renounce their faith and pay homage to this image. Now, if anybody understands Jewish people, pork, swine, whatever, they don't play that, right? But because of Mosaic law, they don't eat that. And to defile the altar with that that's a big no-no. So here he's done this historically, yet Revelation says that it's going to happen again when the Antichrist essentially duplicates this almost in detail, except for the fact he's going to set up an image of himself and have it be worshipped as God, not Zeus. So anyway, so those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery. For many days they shall fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity and plundering. So when Antiochus came back and he attacked Jerusalem, it's said that he killed 80,000 Jews, he took 40,000 prisoners, and sold another 40,000 as slaves. He also plundered the temple, robbing it of approximately what would boil down to today's terms of $1 billion by today's modern calculations. So that's what he did to the Holy Land. So, again, we see that all the way up. This was an appointed time. This was on God's calendar. God wasn't in heaven going, oh my gosh, do you see what he's doing? What do we do? You guys, I'm calling a meeting. Everybody would be down in the meeting room, in the conference room at 4. Jesus, I know you're busy, but could you be in the conference room at 4? We've got to pull this thing together because Antiochus Epiphanes went wild. That's not how it goes, guys. This was an appointed time. So when we watch the destruction of that, I love what, and I'm sure it was said before Sherlock Valley ever said it, but he said World War I created a people for the land. World War II created a land for the people. And there's an appointed time. That's why I'm saying that. There's an appointed time. Had these wars, people died in wars, completely unrelated. Some farm boy from Tennessee died. Why? But in the grand scheme of things, we understand, that people died. These things happen. They're for an appointed time. That's why whosoever will come. So whosoever will call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. God understands there's appointed times, and some of these appointed times gets kind of ugly, right? Gets kind of nasty. He'd be a mean God if there wasn't any alternative. But he's given us that hope. He's given us that opportunity. So while he's accomplishing his appointed times, he's also accomplishing our appointed time. There's a whole lot of appointments on his calendar, is there not? And that's amazing to me. Nevertheless, you say, well, wow, how could this happen? So we're just now making it up to the turn of the clock, or the turn of the calendar, so to speak, just starting to get near zero. Zero actually wasn't counted as AD. It began 1 AD, but we're nearing that point, and we see Rome beginning to come into power now. So when we pick up in the New Testament, we understand, okay, Rome's in control. The lights come up. We see the movie being played on the screen. Rome's in power. Okay, so now let's zero in on the exploits, if you will, in Antiochus Epiphanes as it relates to the latter times. So there in verse 36, then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and he shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for what has been determined shall be done. So now he will exalt himself above every god. This angel is explaining to Daniel that this character is going to exalt himself above God, or in the place of God. So when we talk about Antichrist, we're talking about that which is against Christ. So this and above every god, you see that there's kind of a shift taking place here. So we're not necessarily talking about the Ptolemies and the Seleucids anymore. Now we're talking about a real live, beyond, far out future event. So we've concluded with the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. So we're looking at the Antichrist as a world dictator. Daniel was told that this revelation pertained to the latter days. So flipping back over there, let me flip just for a second. You guys hang tight. Chapter 10, verse 14 says this. He says, now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days, yet is the vision for many days, So what he was telling Daniel there, it says, now I've give you this stuff, but I'm going to tell you what's beyond that, the latter days. So if I'm talking about the days ahead, and then I say the latter days, then you're able to distinguish that. Oh, okay, you're talking about tomorrow, but then you're talking about next year also. And that's kind of what's being conveyed right there in chapter 10, verse 14. So we look at this final world dictator, a last days Antiochus, if you will. So he ends up being a historical preview of Antichrist, and that's why the Bible gives so much space in describing this character, because it gives us so much insight to who Antichrist and the nature of him is and what he's going to be like. And the interesting thing here is for us, the church, trying to play pin the tail on the Antichrist is a game of speculation. And while it's important, it's great, it's fun studying, it's fun looking at headlines and not necessarily trying to play pin the tail on the Antichrist. It's one thing that we live in a time where we could even have that conversation feasibly, and realistically, if you will, to consider, is he alive on the earth today? And I believe that he certainly, most likely, is. The message to the church here of late has been, watch and pray, therefore, because I'm coming in an hour when you think not. So when the Lord's telling us that, the Antichrist is alive and well. He doesn't know that yet. He doesn't know. There's probably many people that could occupy the role as far as political position, as far as money, as far as power, as far as influence. There's probably many people, but the devil's got his crosshairs on a couple and says he'd make a great candidate for my man. So a lot is committed here, contributed here, or given here in Scripture. So let's pick up. Let me read verses 37 through 39. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. But in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses, and a God which his fathers did not know he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. So when we talk about that section, it says, he shall neither regard the God of his fathers nor the desire of women. Some people believe that the Antichrist will actually be of Jewish descent. Now there's a whole school of thought out there that says that they think it's a Muslim, going to be a Muslim. The Antichrist would be a Muslim. But I don't see that. Personally, I don't see that. I believe he'll come out of that revived Roman Empire. Of course, Israel was in that part of that old Roman Empire, as it were. So possibly the Antichrist could be of Jewish descent. It says that he doesn't have the desire for women. Some people say that he would perhaps be a homosexual. It could mean that, but interestingly too, many commentators believe that the desire of women refers to Jesus in all that women desired, the honor of bearing the Messiah, and understanding desire as it was used in Haggai 2:7. Seeing the desire of women as Jesus makes most sense in light of the flow of this context. So women said about Jesus, how blessed would you, Elizabeth told Mary, how blessed are you, and then how blessed are, the King James says, the paps that give suck to those, the breasts that give milk to that baby, is what it's saying. How blessed are you? So the desire of women was to give birth to the Christ. What an honor it was for Mary to give birth to Jesus. So here, while in the near term you could read he didn't have a desire for women, could mean that he's homosexual, but it also could mean nobody wants to give birth to the Antichrist. I mean, how would you like to be mama and then look on the news one day and there's your boy? You know what I mean? So it could be in that context as well. I just throw that out there. So let's read from verses 40 all the way to the end. We'll go ahead and wrap up chapter 11. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships, and shall enter other countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand: Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, over the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. But the news from the east and north shall trouble him. East and north of Israel is going to be Russia and Iran. And he shall go out with a great fury to destroy and annihilate many. And he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. So this time of the end, the angel's describing to Daniel this confederation of kings. And we talked about, that the feet mixed with iron and clay. We said it's got the resemblance of Rome, but that clay, there's some soft spots in there, and they don't mix well. Clay's not necessarily that strong, so it's got this semblance of what modern day theologians and scholars call a revived Roman Empire. So the angel's describing to Daniel here this confederation of kings that's going to come against this great leader. But when you read in Revelation, you find where the beast comes out of the sea, and he has 10 horns, and on those horns got 7 crowns and all that stuff. That's a description of him usurping the authority over these figureheads and these power heads here. So here Daniel's even alluding to that. So the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. Prophetically speaking, precisely trying to identify these peoples here mentioned, it's difficult. It's difficult to narrow it down and say that's this nation, that's this nation. Ezekiel, it's a little easier if we go in there and dig in Ezekiel's chapter 38 and 39, looking at some of that. But the king of the south could be Egypt. It could represent all the Arab community. What we see right now in the news taking place right now is we see, better relations with the Arabs and the Jews right now. I don't know, go figure. But that's what we're seeing right now. The king of the north, which is Antichrist's domain, it could be his domain. It could be Russia, meaning far point to the north. The general idea is this, though. The end is going to be marked by great conflict. And that's the thing that we need to understand. It culminates in the world's armies gathering together in the promised land to end up doing final battle. And that's really where all this comes up. Antichrist is going to come to his end. He's actually going to be chained and he's going to be put away for 1,000 years. And then at the end of that 1,000 years, he's going to be loose for a season, the Bible tells us. And then when he mounts his last-ditch rebellion, he'll be done away with permanently, and he'll be cast into the lake of fire forever. So, Daniel 11, history to us. It was prophecy to Daniel. It's prophecy to us, if that makes sense. It's still prophetic to us in that sense. So that is probably one of the most difficult chapters that I've ever tried to teach in my entire life, because of it's a lot of information there, and I tried not to do that a disservice, but we can really get bogged down in the details, and you talk about a real sleeper. I mean, this is worse than golf on Sunday afternoon after you've had a big lunch. This will really put you to sleep if you're not interested in this kind of thing. And then even if you are, it'll still put you to sleep. But just understand this, the amazing thing about it is we look back, and for all the folks that would try to denounce and say that Daniel wasn't a prophet, this wasn't apocalyptic literature, this is just Daniel being a historian. Daniel's life can be validated through history. What he said, what was prophesied to him told to him by the angel Gabriel, has both indeed been fulfilled, is being fulfilled, and will be fulfilled. So encourage yourself and just know that the Word of God can be trusted, even in the difficult times, even when you run across something that's a hard truth. We live in a day and time where people will change the truth and make the truth comfortable to them. But who is bigger, me or the truth? And when we're talking about the truth, we're almost talking about something, we're talking about something beyond gravity. Because if Jesus was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and Jesus is the way and the truth and the life, but in the beginning he created the heavens and the earth, so I can say the truth is like gravity, but no, the truth surpasses even forces like gravity. You know, it's beyond that. So to exalt the truth and put it in its proper place is to prepare yourself to receive from the truth. See, if I'm always trying to dictate to the truth what I'm willing to swallow, then that impositions me, you know, because I'm having to obey the truth. But if I submit and bow to the truth and say, Lord, not your will be done, or not my will be done, but your will be done, then I allow him to do a miraculous work. And that's what we celebrate. That's what we rejoice in, is the Word of God. Again, 66 books, penned by over 40 authors, an integrated message system. This thing is written over 1,500 years by over 40 different people, and yet it laces together like a comfortable shoe. So it's amazing.